All right, we're on number 3 of Holy Spirit. This is on page 73 of Book of Israel, Making the Connection. Okay, we're on chapter 3. Number 3 of Holy Spirit will overshadow you. Number 3, Making the Connection. And that's really what this book was about, is making the connection with Yahweh. This is found on page 73. Now, we've covered sections number 1 and number 2 about Spirit Holy here overshadowing us. Now we're getting to the final phase of this. And notice Pastor says, Shalom, everyone. You all get me so choked up, he says, I can't talk. He says, you can be seated. The peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. You see, and that's what Pastor always does. He always gives us Yahweh's peace. He always asks Yahweh's peace to be with us. And he says, I am Yisrayl Hawkins, and I think I'm mostly known as Okie Bill now. He says, that's really a prestigious name, isn't it? The world would throw a fit if anyone called them that. McCall would too, wouldn't she? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? He said, you will before the sermon is over. I said, I will bring some of those things to your remembrance. Because remember, McCall was King David's wife, who ridiculed him for going before Yahweh and dancing before Yahweh, before the ark. Remember? So he's likening that to those who ridicule his name of Buffalo Bill or Okie Bill, whatever you want to call him. To us, it is a very prestigious name because we realize what it means. But the wicked will never understand, so they won't. Okay, verse 2, it says, it's great to be joyful. It seems like on the Sabbath is when we rejoice and we get ready to face the week. You know, and the Sabbath is the time of rejoicing because you realize that Yahweh gave us that day, you know, and that is the mark of Yahweh, that we can actually understand what that day is about and actually be able to rejoice on that day because the world doesn't understand it and they never will. But we get ready to face the week coming up. So it gives us the strength that we need to continue on. He says, I know that all of you have noticed the pressure that is upon you. The pressure, you know. First of all, let's get into the main subject of this, referring to that pressure. The main subject of this sermon is to endure the keeping of Yahweh's laws. Whatever pain or suffering we have to endure, okay, in order to make it into that kingdom. Remember, only the humble will make the connection with Yahweh, because pride will prevent that connection, okay? And we're striving to make that connection with Yahweh, and that's what the revealing of the sons and daughters of Yahweh is all about. So we have to endure keeping those laws, okay? And so he talks about this pressure. And if you remember, in verse 2, the word pressure, one of the meanings of that word is tribulation, okay? And tribulation is Strong's number 2347, and the first meaning is pressure, okay? It means pressure or affliction, being afflicted, anguish, burdened, persecution, tribulation, and trouble, okay? And so we're now living in this time period. This is the time of pressure when afflictions will come and we will suffer anguish of everyday life and everyday troubles, you know. It's the continual enduring. And of course, that's what he told, Cain that he had to do. He had to endure. He had to continue on to enduring. Had Cain endured, he wouldn't have been driven to the point to where he murdered his brother. So he says, I notice you notice the pressure that has come upon you. I have, he says, and that many of the priests have. I know many of the families have because you told me. It's universal in the house of Yahweh. It's only one way to stop it that I know of, or possibly 2 ways. If you turn over to Matthew, he says, I will try to show you why this is coming, and it will get worse. Notice, it will get worse. It's not going to get any better. It's going to get worse. The pressure will increase. The anguish will increase. The burdens will increase. All of these things will promise to have increase, okay? But remember, Yahweh won't put anything on us that we can't handle. So he's going to increase these things, but at the same time, he's also given us his strength to be able to make it through it. So he says the pressures that you are suffering right now are also sicknesses. People wake up with headaches. They don't know what they did or what is causing them. He says, I think I can show you what is causing it. The unbelievers might not believe it, but it will get worse until Yahweh stops it. Okay, verse 4, he says, the Savior here is asked about this in time. You might want to highlight that. In time. The time we're living in right now. Highlight that section there. He talks about the end time, the time that we're living in right now. Okay? Let's look at that word, end. This is the Webster's Collegiate Dictionary. The word end means a point that marks the end of something. Okay? Let's just take it this way, one step at a time. A point that marks the end, the extent of something. So this is the time marked at a specific point in Yahweh's plan. Okay? Remember that. It marks a certain thing. Okay? It also means the cessation of a course of action. Notice the course of action, pursuit, or activity. Okay, well, remember, the last 3.5 years is a plan of action, right? It's a plan of activity, and that's what the prophet Daniel speaks about. And of course, we hear a lot about that in dealing with the peace plan as well. That is in the last 3.5 years. It also means to reach a specified ultimate situation. In other words, this is the time that's reached through Yahweh's plan. Okay, so this is something that it's a point that is marked in time, or the plan of Yahweh. It's a plan of action, a course of action. Things have to take place in order to see the end come to completion. And notice it means to reach a specified ultimate situation. Okay, so certain things have to take place, basically, is what it's saying. Certain things have to take place in order for the end time to come to completion. Okay? So Yeshua was talking about that. He says, back to the book, he says, King David wrote a lot about this in the Psalms. He says, I will not cover that today because I have other things that I want to cover. He says, but I will show you what Yeshua said. And he says, highlight this part where it says, King David talked about the wicked living joyously, but the trials, tests, and suffering were on Yahweh's people. When you worship the Queen of Heaven, you do not have her to fight, so you're not going to suffer this. Okay, highlight that whole section. King David talked about the wicked living joyously, and the trials and the tests and the suffering, they were on Yahweh's people. But when you worship the Queen of Heaven, well, you just don't have to worry about those things, right? Well, if you remember reference sources, Jeremiah 44:17 through 19, when the women said, well, we were baking cakes to the Queen of Heaven, we were worshiping her, we didn't have any problems, These things never came upon us as long as we were worshiping the Queen of Heaven. And so their minds were so blinded on how they were actually being used that, they never saw the consequences of the actions. They never realized the consequences of the actions. So speaking of this time period, this is when it's going to be the worst. Okay? This is when it's going to be the worst. This time period. He says you read about it in other places, but this is the time period when it will be the worst. You can bank on it. This is coming. It's here now. It's with us now. And it will get worse for a short time. Okay? It will get worse for a short time. A short time. In Romans 9:28, that's when Yahweh says, for he will finish the work, yet he will cut it short in righteousness, because Yahweh will make a short work upon the earth. Okay? That's Romans 9:28. He's going to finish that work. He's going to bring it to completion, yet it's going to be cut short in righteousness. Okay? Because Yahweh's going to make a short work on earth. And of course, the reason why it's going to be cut short in righteousness is because it's the elect who will be found righteous, because they are practicing the laws of Yahweh, as 1 Yochanan 3:7 says, right? He who practices the law of Yahweh is righteous. So if you practice righteousness, you are righteous. So there's going to be a short work upon this earth. Okay? But he says it's going to be the worst time. Now, of course, we're familiar with Matthew 24, but look at Matthew 24, verses 21 and 22. He says, then will be great tribulation, such as not come to pass since the beginning of the world. Now, this is not just talking about the creation of the earth, but it includes the universe. Okay? The word world, that's the Greek word cosmos, and it means the earth and the universe. Okay? So since the beginning of the world, beginning of the universe, to this time. Then, of course, the word time, remember, spoken of by Daniel, nor ever will be, okay? Because there will only be need to see this done only once in the entire existence of the universe in order for Yahweh's plan to be complete. That's all he wants to see. It's going to be so devastating that he'll really only want to do it one time, okay? But it's going to prove the point to the universe as well, that you can't live without Yahweh's laws or you'll see the destruction that comes. Verse 22, and unless those days, remember, that's the time period known as the end, unless those days were shortened, which shows that it's necessary to be done, it has to be done, there would no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened, okay? No life form as we see it could it continue to exist if those days were not shortened. But notice, they will be shortened, okay? That's a command or a promise of Yahweh. Now, Yeshua said this again in Yakanan Mark 13. It's a little different, but it's pretty much the same as we just saw. But notice something. For in those days will be tribulation, such as not from the beginning of the creation. Not since the beginning. Here he actually says it out. Not since the beginning of the creation. And will never be again, notice. If Yahweh had not cut short those days, notice that. If Yahweh had not cut short those days. So here we see by whose power and authority this is being done. No flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he has chosen, he has cut short the days. Okay, he has cut short the days. Now, what I want you to notice is this difference here. If you notice, the last two lines here, okay, it says in a little bit different, but there's a little more insight into the plan of Yahweh here, because Matithia tells us the fact that those days of great tribulation will be cut short, right? They will be cut short. Yakanan Mark informs us of the promise and the judgment that those days have already been cut short, okay? You see that? It has been cut short. Okay? It has been cut short, and they will be shortened, okay? So you can see here that there's the judgment has been set. It's a set thing already in action that it will take place. It has to take place just the way that Yahweh says it. Okay, and we'll see that word promise. We'll see something about that word later. In verse 6, Matithia 24:1, back in the book here, he says, Matithia 24:1, Yeshua went out and was leaving the temple. His disciples came to him to show him the temple building. Okay, this was this magnificent temple building. And Yeshua said to them, do you see all these things? That is, do not put your hope or your stock in this, because it's not going to be here. Okay, it's going to be taken away. Now, in Yakanan Mark, you see a little bit more how the disciples were thinking about these things. In Yakanan Mark 13:1 and 2, and as he was leaving the temple, one of the disciples said to him, Teacher, look, what great dressed stones and what wonderful buildings is this building. You know, they were amazed at it, and because it was a beautiful place. And Yeshua answering said to them, you see this great building? There will not be left one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. Now, the first century historian Flavius Josephus, in his book Antiquities of the Jews, in book 15, chapter 11, he talks about these stones, and he says these stones were white and strong, and he gives a measurement of 50 feet long, 24 feet broad, and 16 feet thick. So no wonder the apostles were fascinated, about the magnificence of that building. These were some huge, huge stones. They were gigantic. But Yeshua said, you see this? Don't put any stock in it, because it's going to come down. And it's the same with the magnificent buildings of what mankind has always done. Like the cathedral buildings and stuff. The cathedrals, those are works of art, as far as architect with the arches and all of that. Those things are really magnificent buildings. And then, of course, you have the tall skyscrapers and all of these things. But he says, don't look at these things. Don't stock in this. This is all stuff of man's, and it's all going to be crumbling down. In other words, put your hope in Yahweh, not in the things of mankind. Continuing on page 73 at the top of the page here, this is in verse 6. He says, by that time, the leaders of the temple had already rejected Yahweh, and they had rejected his laws. Okay? They had already rejected Yahweh and had rejected his laws. Now, go into Micaiah 3, 1 through 2, okay? Then I said, hear now, O heads of Yaakov, you rulers of the house of Israel. Is it not for you to know justice? You who hate righteousness and love evil, who strip off the skin from my people and the meat from their bones. So, that's a pretty graphic description of just some heartless people devouring the population that's under their control, the elites. They have no care, no concern for the well-being of others. And, of course, Yeshua called them a crooked and perverse generation, because that's exactly what they were. They could care less about the people. And remember, these were the shepherds. These were the ones who were responsible for taking care of the people. But he says, you strip the meat off their bones. You see how heartless they were. So they had rejected the laws of Yahweh. Okay, so the leaders of the temple had already rejected Yahweh. They had rejected his laws. The laws of Yahweh were not being taught in the temple. Being kept in the temple. They had rejected these things. Remember, but Yeshua said, look, the laws are still being kept, and while they are, go there and listen to them and hear them so you can hear the laws being preached. But don't follow their examples, because they'll turn right around and tell you something and then turn around and do something just the opposite. And notice he says here, they were about to fulfill another prophecy, which was to be scattered into all nations. They were going to be scattered into all nations. Well, one of the prophecies that gets me thinking about this is in Yecheskia 36, verses 19 through 20. Scattered. Notice what he says. And I scattered them among the heathen, or among the nations, and they were dispersed through the countries. Now remember that this is exactly what Abraham was promised, that his seed would take over the earth, okay? And this is the way that Yahweh allowed it to be done. According to their way and according to their doings, I judged them, okay? Because, this wasn't hatred or wrath that was done, because Yahweh warned them, don't seek after the gods. One of his laws is, don't go and inquire of how they worship their gods. If you do, then my judgment or prophecy is that you will become as they are, and you'll lose out on my blessings and my protection. Okay, so they were dealt with according to their doings, okay? According to their own doings. This wasn't anything that Yahweh's not a vengeful God, but he allows things to take place according to what mankind brings upon himself. He has a choice. Remember Deuteronomy 30, choose this day whom you will serve and make the choices of life or death. In verse 20 says, when they came to the heathen, wherever they went, they profaned my sacred name. And then it is said of them, these are the people of Yahweh, whom they had to leave his land. Right? What did they do? They went out among the heathen and they profaned the name of Yahweh. And this is what he had warned them, that you're going to be scattered. I'm going to disperse you among the countries because that's what you choose. Remember, it's the same with Samuel when they said, give us a king, right? Well, notice they profaned his name. Now, the interesting thing about that word name is position, okay? One of the meanings is number 8034, and name means position, okay? Well, they had profaned the position of Yahweh. They no longer considered him as being their heavenly Father. Name also means an affiliation as a mark, right? You're marked. Mark is a sign of ownership, who you belong to. Either you belong to Yahweh or you belong to Satan, whoever you serve. It also means a memorial of individuality, a name. Everybody has a name, okay? And you live up to that name. You strive to live up to that name. It makes you into an individual. If everybody's name was George or Frank, then everybody would be named Frank and George, you know? There'd be no individuals. There'd be nothing. but it's a memorial. It's something to remember an individual with when you know their name and you call upon their name. It also means honor and authority and character. Notice, character. So, this is something, remember character. Well, what kind of character did they have? Well, you remember if you go back to Micaiah 3, verse 2, you remember they hate righteousness. You hate righteousness and you love evil, right? So that was their character, to be evil like the gods, but not loving kind like Yahweh, but evil like the gods. Okay, let's go back to the book, verse 7 here. So they were scattered among the nations. That was another fulfilled prophecy. Well, underline this now. Underline also in verse 6 right above, by the time the leaders of the temple had already rejected Yahweh and had rejected his laws. By that time. Highlight that. By that time the leaders of the temple had already rejected Yahweh and had rejected his laws. And then verse 7 here, highlight these next 3 sentences. The temple was destroyed in 70 AY, about 40 years after this was prophesied. The mountain was plowed like a field, and no one knew for years that a temple had stood there. This is exactly in fulfillment of a Bible prophecy. Okay, highlight all of that. This is in fulfillment of a Bible prophecy, of course. For references, you can put Jeremiah 26:18 and Micaiah 3:12. Jeremiah 26:18 and Micaiah 3:12 for your references. Now he goes on, he says, the rest of this is going to take place too. Because Yahweh would not have said something if it is not going to be something that involved his people and an amount of suffering that was going to take place among us. Right? He wouldn't say something if it didn't have a meaning behind it, a reason behind it. And remember, Acts 14:22 says, through much tribulation, we will enter into the kingdom. So we know that we're promised that we have to go through much tribulation. And even the prophet Isaiah, remember he said that my word will not be sent out and return unto me void without accomplishing the thing in which I set it out to do to begin with. And then, of course, Proverbs talks about a curse doesn't causeless come, right? It comes with a cause. It's not causeless. That's what a curse brings. A curse is brought about because of something that you do that breaks something. Okay, verse 8 here, he says, verse 3, now as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us when these things will be. What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? The sign of your coming. Let's go through this. The sign of your coming. The word sign is number 5492. It's an indication from 4591. Its sign is number 4592. It's from 4591, and it means a mark. Okay, a mark. Now note, it's only those who have the mark of Yahweh who can understand the signs of the times. The signs of the times. What times? It's the same time period that the prophet Daniel spoke about, indicating when the end or the last days would be. It's so important to understand these things, okay? Don't ever let them just roll through your head and just put them off, okay? Always remember the signs of the time. Every time you see that word time, times, it's talking about what Daniel said. The word end, okay? Signs of the end. The word end means an entire completion, okay? Yahweh doesn't work halfway. He's going to bring this to completion. That is a consumption, okay? Consummation of a dispensation. We're going to look at that word in a moment. But it means to complete. It's number 4930. It's from 4931, which means to complete entirely or finish, okay? Because Yahweh's plan is going to be finished concerning the rule of mankind, and all of his promises will come to pass, okay? It's going to come to pass. See that word dispensation. Webster's says it means a system of revealed commands and promises. Notice that. It's a system of revealed commands and promises regulating human affairs. Okay? So this is the consummation. This is the completion of this system of revealed commands and promises that regulate human affairs. Okay? And of course, remember, Yahweh puts people into office. He takes people out of office, right? He does all of these things. And the scriptures are very plain on that. So we know that this is speaking about the end of man's governments, of course, in the institution of Yahweh's government. Now it said the end of the age. Notice, the word age in the King James is the word world. There's number 165. Lindell and Scott Greek Dictionary says it means a period of existence, a generation. Okay? A space of time clearly defined and marked out. And notice this word, the end of the age. The end of this period of existence. Okay? Something is existing that's coming to a completion. And of course, that's man's rule without the laws of Yahweh. It's a generation. Okay, the end of this generation. You remember Yeshua called this an evil and adulterous generation. And it's a space of time that's clearly defined and marked out. Okay, so we see, let's talk about a certain time period. It's the end of man's government. Now, it's clearly defined and marked out. Okay, it's precise. Everything that takes place according to Yahweh's prophecies is exact. Okay, now why is this so important? Well, remember what 2 Kepha 3, verse 3 and 4 says. First, you must understand that scoffers will come in the last days. We're not living in the last days. And saying, where is the promise of his coming? The promise? You remember that word, dispensation? It's a system of revealed commands and promises regulating human affairs. Where is the promise of his coming? For since the days the fathers fell asleep, all things have remained just as they were from the beginning of creation. Now that's what the scoffers are saying. They're saying, in other words, they're calling Yahweh a liar. That, hey, we'll never, everything's still the same. It's always been this way. There's no difference in what we see. My great-grandparents saw these things and talked about these things. It's no difference. So this is what the scoffers are saying. But as the disciples asked him, he says, what will be the sign of the coming and the end of the age? So let's get back to the book. He says, here he is speaking of the time period that we are now in. They're wanting to know, not their time period, but the end time, what we're going to look for. And Yeshua answered and said to them, be on guard that no man deceives you. No man deceives you. Remember 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3 talks about the deception. Be on guard. Don't let anybody deceive you. So obviously he would not have warned us of this if there were not some men who would try to deceive you. And the deception is going wild right now. All over the world. In Matthew 24, verse 5, he says, many will come against my name, saying, I am anointed to preach salvation. But notice, they will deceive many. And that's what's going on all over the world. For reference, of course, Matthew 24, 23 and 24. Matthew 24, 23 and 24. And 2 Timothy 3, 5. And, of course, Revelations 12, 9. Right? Because Matthew 24, 23 and 24 talks about that they're going to try to deceive the very elect if possible. Be on guard. 2 Timothy 3, 5 says, they have a form of holiness, but they deny the faith. And, of course, Revelations 12, 9 says that the whole world is deceived. The whole world is deceived. So we have to be on guard not to fall into that trap. Verse 10, so he says, if you listen to any of these preachers, you'll know that they teach Jesus is out there saying, lay all your burdens and cares on me. I did it for you. I will do it for you. I will relieve you of all your pains and sufferings. All you have to do is give me your soul, right? So in other words, what's being preached, and what has been preached all my life, he says, among the Christians, but has gotten worse now is, highlight the rest of this verse, you can't overcome. You can't keep the laws. You can't come to perfection, but you can lay it on Jesus and he would do it for you. Okay, highlight that section. You can't overcome, you can't keep the laws, you can't come to perfection, but you can lay it on Jesus and he'll do it for you. Okay, that's what they want you to believe. Now, he says if you want to give up what Yahweh has told you to do in coming to perfection and stop trying, then you'll do that. You can go to church, and you can lay it all on Jesus, and then the pain will stop. And this is the strife and the pressure that you're under. It will suddenly cease from you because you stop trying to overcome. So you're not fighting anymore. You've gotten the swing of Christianity and going to burn. That is, it's going to burn. Lay it all on Jesus, right? You know, for the scriptures say a little bit different for your reference sources here. Philippians 2, 12 to 13. Okay, therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not in my presence only, notice, not in my presence only, but how much more in my absence. Work out your own salvation, okay, with fear and trembling. For it is Yahweh who is at work in you. Notice, Yahweh's doing the work with you, okay? Yahweh doesn't leave and forsake us. He works with us. He brings us to perfection if we'll allow him to do it, both to will and to act according to his righteous pleasure. That's what he wants us to do. He wants us to be our will to act according to righteousness, okay? And he wants to see us perform righteousness, and he works in us to do that. And then in Job 4:17 says, therefore, to anyone who knows how to act righteously, but doesn't do it, it is sin. Okay? So there's quite a bit of difference between what the scriptures teach and what Jesus says, to lay it all on them and have someone else do it for you. Okay? Well, you can't have anybody else do it for you. You have to do it. You have to work out your own salvation. Otherwise, you do away with the scriptures, right? It means nothing to you. All right, continue on here. He says, you have gotten with the swing of Christianity and it's going to burn. At the bottom of the page, he says, there is no profit in it. There is no benefit. There's no benefit in Christianity is what he's saying. And there's no benefit to the world or to you. It's a worthless thing that has caused and is causing the world to come to an end and the governments to come to an end. Now, you remember what Isaiah 24, 1 through 6 talks about, right? That they have, because they have transgressed the laws and have forsaken the covenant, which is what Christianity has done, then it's going to cause the destruction of the earth. The world is going to be destroyed, and all the wicked will be as stubble, it says. This is what Christianity has brought upon this earth, by them following these things. Now, notice. It's our job, and this is what Yahweh tells us to do, to continue to endure into the end, notice. That's our job. That's your job. You want a job to do? Well, Yahweh gives us one as soon as we enter into the covenant with him, and that is to endure to the end. There's no excuses. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Notice, you got to endure into the end. It doesn't matter what takes place. It doesn't matter what kind of day we have. It doesn't matter what we're battling with. We have to endure. We can't escape that. We must endure and become perfect. And of course, the reference sources for that would be to become perfect is Matthew 5, verse 48, where Yeshua said that, be perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect. And to endure into the end, Mark 13:13, you got to endure into the end. Until the end, Daniel's time period, the end, the last 3.5 years, the time period we're in right now, okay? It's where the promises of the governing, the revealing of the governing of man's affairs is being revealed. All of these things. No other generation has understood what we understand in these last days. No other generation has been given the understanding and the ability to comprehend what this world has become. You had the time period when the book of Yahweh was taken away, and it was called the Dark Ages. Well, it was dark because there was no light. There was no scripture there that could lead and guide the people. All this was taken away from them. He says, many of the priests have called me and told me that they would just start crying. He said, I started experiencing this a few years ago and it has not let up. He said, now I know it involves everyone. I know it's involving all of you. Possibly you have not experienced it enough to know what I'm talking about, or you think it's coming from something else. But it's not. You will experience it if you have not. If you're drawing close enough to Yahweh, you'll know what he's talking about here. Okay? There are times when things that, and it can be something almost like simple, but it will seem so overwhelming because other things continue to build up and build up and build up. He says you will experience it if you have not. It's going to involve every one of you, children and all. It's something that we have to face. It's something we have to face. It's something we have to fight. And it's something we have to live with. And it's something we have to endure with until Yahweh changes it as a test to us to bring us to perfection. Yahweh has to change it, okay? Until Yahweh changes it, it's not going to leave us, okay? Now, think about reference sources, because if Yahweh's going to bring this upon us, well, you remember Exodus 20:20. That's the easy one to remember. Exodus 20:20, where he says, Moshe said to the people, do not fear. Now, fear is going to play a very important part in these last days, especially as the time gets nearer the end, because people, remember Yeshua said people's hearts will be failing them for fear. And Yahweh tells us, do not fear. We don't have to fear. Yahweh is in complete control. If we put our trust in Yahweh, we won't have to fear what's taking place. Do not fear, for Yahweh has come to test and prove you. Well, why? So that the reverence of Yahweh will be in you. Well, for what reason? So that you do not commit sin. Okay? Yahweh's come to test and to prove us, because he wants to see the reverence for him. Okay? And the only way he can see that is if he tests us and proves us to see what is in our heart. Because remember, the heart is desperately wicked. But Yahweh can change the heart and the mind, and that's what he's doing. He wants us so that we don't commit sin. Matthew 24:11-13, and many false religions will be aroused and will deceive the many, because they're the whole cause of deception in this world today. Of course, being led and being taught by Satan. And that word "and," this is a conjunction that connects the above verse with this verse. Okay, it connects the two of them. These many false religions will be aroused and deceive the many, and because of that, because iniquity, the breaking of Yahweh's laws, will abound, the love of the many will grow cold. Well, for what reason? To test you, to see if you're going to choose deception also. Okay? Because he says, choose this day, one way or the other. Either you can choose life or you can choose death. And so the iniquity has to increase, the love of the many has to grow cold in order to test us to see whether we would join in with that or not. But notice verse 13. But he who endures unto the end, remember the end time period, known as the last 3.5 years spoken of by Daniel the prophet. That's what we're living in today. The same who endures during this 3.5 years, last 3.5 years, only those who do endure will be saved. Okay? They will be saved. That's the promise. Will be. They will be saved. And of course, when you know this time period that we're living in, then you also know the prophecies dealing with the one who will be teaching in these last days and inspiring the world and telling the world and teaching the world and giving them the understanding about this last 3.5 years and about the writings of Daniel and all the prophets of what was said. Then you will realize Isaiah 49 tells you, verse 6, that Israel will be glorified by Yahweh. Yahweh will glorify himself in Israel, in Isaiah 49:3. And in verse 6 he says, you will be my salvation to the ends of the earth. Salvation will only come through Yisrayl Hawkins. That's it. That's how we will receive salvation, is through his teachings, through him, believing in the one sent. And that's what prophecies tell us that we have to do. And that's why it says, what we just read, that only those who endure will be saved in this end time in which we're living in. It's so critical for you to understand about the end time in the writings of Daniel, what it means the last 3.5 years. Because if you don't, you're going to lose it. You're not going to fully understand what Yahweh is trying to teach us here. Okay, let's get back to the book here. Verse 13. And this is part of the deception. Lay your cares on Jesus and he will do it all for you. Yeah, just lay it on him. Whatever you want, put the blame on. Basically what they're saying is put the blame on Jesus. Let Jesus be the one who suffers for your sins. You just continue to sin, but just lay it on him. I remember the Christians used to say, oh, that guy, he backslid. Backslid? What in the world does backslid mean? Find that in the scriptures, He backslid. It's an excuse because he wanted to go live into the world, go back into the world and live in the world. But all you got to do is just say, yeah, I believe you, Jesus. I believe you, and he'll do it all for you. Well, that's the bull crud that you see going on. That's the lies that Christianity is teaching. Directly against what we just saw, where it says, work out your own salvation, right? Then they show them on TV pointing, holding up their hands and looking so holy, swaying back and forth and singing those beautiful, beautiful tunes, right? Yeah, they like to take that Bible and swing that Bible. That's the only use they got for it. It's like using it as a fan. They swing it back and forth. And then, of course, they got to talk. A lot of them were trained to talk in that rhythm, right? That certain rhythm that they talk. And they got a certain breathing technique and a certain rhythm in which they teach. And then really what that does is it starts mesmerizing the mind to where the people start hearing that rhythm, and then it tunes them in to what he's saying, and the gods just deceive their minds even more. It makes it even stronger. That's what the real successful ones do. When they go to the schools and they learn exactly what to do, the right techniques, they can really pack in the people and have these mega churches, Well, he says these beautiful tunes. He says you could not ask for God. He says you could not ask for more beautiful tunes or words in worship to these gods. They have the highest paid musicians that there are. There's nothing on ours. He says, believe me, they have nothing on ours, and I applaud our people. He says, believe me, the words we're trying to perform these songs to Yahweh are suffering. The ones who's trying to perform these songs to Yahweh are suffering too. And lots of times that's how a lot of the inspiration comes. It's through the trials and tests that you go through. You realize how you put your trust in Yahweh, and it makes nice songs. That's the same thing King David did. Remember, with the Psalms, he did the same thing. He said they're suffering the same things as I am. He says if they are worse or not as bad, he says I don't know. He says but I know that they're suffering, and I know that it will get worse. Here he says it again. It's going to get worse. That's a great promise we got, right? Okay, so verse 15 here, he says, so you will hear, Yeshua says, this is Matthew 24:6, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is still not yet. Okay? The end is still not yet. Now he says you're going to hear of wars, and you're going to hear of wars and wars and wars, and that's exactly what you hear going on today. It's abundant in the news. But notice this, in Matthew 24:6 and 7, he says, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled. Okay? For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. You're going to hear it. It's going to come to pass, and you're going to hear more, and it's going to come to pass. Nation will rise against nation. But of course, at one time, soon it's going to take over to where Yahweh's going to step back and say, release them. But notice, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Do not be troubled. Now, Yeshua knew this prophecy, okay? In Jeremiah 51:46, he says, now should your hearts grow faint, remember he says, don't be troubled. Should your hearts grow faint and you become frightened because of the rumors, notice the rumors of wars, Matthew 24:6, because of the rumors heard in the land, for rumors will come year after year, but Yeshua said, but the end is not yet. Rumors of violence in the land, rumors of ruler against ruler, right? nation against nation, ruler against ruler. The rumors will come year after year, but the end is not yet. The rumors of war, the rumors of violence, notice, okay, of the rumors of wars, all of these things. So Yeshua studied the prophecies. He knew what the prophets spoke about, and he gave us insight on these things and taught us these things. So let's go back here. He says, you will hear of these wars, but the end is not yet. Now remember, he was talking to his disciples at the time, and they asked him, what are the signs of the times? Okay, the end of this age. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. Okay, kingdom against, they will rise nation against nation. But the end, notice, is not yet. You remember what he says here in Habakkuk? Okay, Habakkuk 2, verse 3. So Yahweh answered me and said, write the vision, engrave it clearly upon tablets, that he might run who reads it. Run. Remember past the sermons about running that race, the race of endurance? For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak. Well, it's speaking to us now, right? We're in the appointed end time, and it will not lie, because Yahweh can't lie, and his word accomplishes the things in which he sends it out to do. Though it seems slow, wait for it, because it will surely come. Notice, it will not delay. You know, we can rely on Yahweh's promises. It's going to come. It's not going to delay. You know, he doesn't lie. The end will come. You know, it's here. We're living in these last days right now. And we're going to see these things take place. It's going to be rough. It's not going to be an easy time. It's not going to be an easy time when the wars start breaking out and stuff. It's going to be a horrible time. And I'm not talking about just the people out in the world. I'm talking about Yahweh's people as well. We're going to have to go through that and see that. Well, he says, kingdom against kingdom, there'll be famines and pestilence. All right, highlight this word pestilence here means diseases. Highlight that. That's one of the vocabulary words. Pestilence. It means diseases. Now he says, whether you're watching or not, the diseases are increasing. There's something taking place with our people that doesn't seem to be affecting the world. It's coming from a source that has to be from a power that Yahweh is allowing at this time. The headaches sometimes become so severe that you get dizzy, he says, I'm told, when you look down and try to read or work. Now, Yeshua continues and he says, all these are the first half of the sorrows, and they will hand you over to be afflicted. He said, did you see that? And they will call for your death, and you will be hated of all people for my name's sake. They will hand you over to be afflicted, or they will hand you over to be afflicted, or it's the will of Yahweh that you will be afflicted in one way or another. He said that's what's going to take place. You're going to be afflicted. Now remember, for reference, Psalms 119:71. It's beneficial that we are afflicted so that we might learn your statutes. That's one that is said quite often in my mind every day. You're going to be afflicted, okay? We are being afflicted right now. It's something that we can expect, okay? It's something that we can expect. Remember, Yahweh says that we can expect. Remember 1 Kepha 4? 1 Kepha 4, verses 12 through 13. 11 through 13. It said, beloved, do not be amazed concerning the fiery trial in which you must undergo in order to be tested, as though some alien thing were befalling you. Remember, that's the reason why we call it peculiar people. You know, we're like a bunch of aliens on this world. But you don't want to be called a worldling, because that's the heathen. So don't be amazed concerning the fiery trial you got to undergo in order to be tested. For we wrestle not only against flesh and blood, you know, everyday dealings with people, but also against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual forces of the evil one in the heavens. You know, these are the ones you can't see, but that's one of the mental battles that we face day in and day out. Therefore, take up the whole armor of Yahweh, that you might be able to withstand in the evil day. Okay, let's talk about a time period, the time period of the end in which we're living in, not just a single day. In the evil day, the day in which they live and love evil as the gods. Okay? And having overcome all, to stand. That is to stand worthy before his judgment seat. Okay? Overcoming everything and being able to stand. Okay? So we have to stand. We have to endure. We have a kingdom waiting for us and the rewards, but we've got to endure. So going on here, he says, it's something that we have to know that is not coming from Yahweh. It's coming from Satan. Okay, we just saw that. It's coming from Satan. It's coming from the spiritual forces of the evil one. And they're doing this to turn you away, along with all the other temptations that they throw in with their teachings in front of you, like fornication and adultery that come with their teachings, and from trying to overcome. They will try to find your weaknesses, and they'll try to make you weak. Okay? They'll try to make you weak. Now underline this. Yahweh will only allow you to be tested for as much as you can endure. Okay? He's only going to allow you to be tested for as much as you can endure. Yahweh is not unfair. He will never put anything on you. And he certainly knows. He is the creator. He's created us. He knows how we think. He knows how we act. He knows what goes on in our mind. He knows how our mind functions. He knows how our body functions. But he's not going to put anything on us that we can't endure. That's the thing. So when the tests and the trials come, and the pain and the suffering come, he knows that we can endure it. And he might bring it up to a certain point. But then he will release it. And we can be thankful to him and praise him and thank him for allowing us to have to suffer through it. And now it's over with, okay? I might come back again later. But we have to endure. You see, that's the test. Is that no matter how many times we have to go through something, will we give up, or will we continue to praise our Heavenly Father, Yahweh? So we have to endure whatever. You have to be tested as much, and you have to endure. Therefore, notice he says, if you notice some are not being tested so much, it's because of that. It's not that they were not making to the kingdom. They can if they would keep Yahweh's laws. That's one thing required of all of us. They have to keep Yahweh's laws and be obedient to the priests and to Yahweh. Now, may I reference source Deuteronomy 17, 8 through 13, about respecting the priests and so forth, because, you must respect ownership. And Yahweh owns his people. And Yahweh, of course, owns his priests. And so, therefore, he teaches us if you can have respect for another human being, then you can have respect for all things that I have created. And if you can do that, then you will have respect for me, and I know that you will love me, and that you sincerely desire to be as I am. Okay? And that's the whole reason why we're tested to being brought to perfection. We have to endure whatever, whatever comes our way. Verse 19, he says the word kill is not there. He says they will kill you. They will seek to kill you. I believe that was in the verse right before that. He said that. Yeshua said kill, but the word kill is not there. It actually means to call for your death. Now, that's another vocabulary word. So highlight that. The word kill means to call for your death. Doesn't mean actually take your life, but to want to, desire to take your life. Because remember, Yahweh says the gates of hell will not prevail. If they wiped us out, how would Yahweh's work actually come to completion, and his kingdom would be here, and the saints take over, or the saints have possession of the kingdom. Not take over, but have possession of the kingdoms, right? That is, we endure the keeping of his laws, and whatever pain, whatever suffering we have to go to in order to make it into that kingdom. We've got to endure. You remember here, endure whatever. Jacob 1, 12 to 13 says, blessed is the man who endures the temptation, for when he has been proven, he will receive the crown of life. Remember that word crown? Pastor said that word crown means power. If you endure, you will receive the power of life. The power of life. The power to create and maintain flesh and give life, which Yahweh has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I'm tempted by Yahweh. For Yahweh cannot be tempted with evil, nor does he tempt anyone with evil. In Romans 8:18-19, for considering that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which will be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation waits for the revealing of the sons and the daughters of Yahweh. Okay? So, the sufferings of this present time, it just cannot be, it can't be compared with what Yahweh wants to give to us. And then notice, then there will be, many will be offended and will betray one another. I got to get this word in, offended, okay? Many will be offended and betray one another, because notice how much it applies to what we know and understand. The word offended is 46:24. It means to cause a person to begin to distrust and to desert one whom he ought to trust and obey. Well, of course, that's talking about the one sent. It also means to cause to fall away, to be offended in one, to find an occasion of stumbling in one. In other words, to see in another what I disapprove of and what hinders me from acknowledging his authority. Okay, and you've got to believe in the one sent. Okay? But he says many will be offended, many will betray one another, not only with hateful words, but also with the breaking of the laws and trespassing. They will betray one another and hate one another. You know, the hatred mostly comes from people who, when people are corrected, right? And remember what Hebrews 12 says for your reference notes. Hebrews 12:9-11. Furthermore, we have fleshly fathers who have corrected us, and we gave them repentance. Should we not even more be subject to Father Yahweh and live eternally? For they truly chastened us a few days as they thought best, but he for our profit, notice, for our correction. In whatever form we receive it, it's for our profit in tests and trials, that we might be partakers of his holiness. You know, he's making us into his image and his likeness. Now, no chastening seems to be joyful at the present time, but grievous. Nonetheless, after it produces the peaceful fruit of righteousness. That is, for those who have been trained by it. But you have to be willing to accept correction in order to learn from it, right? If you don't, you buck up against correction, you don't accept correction, and you don't respect authority, and you won't make it. Plain and simple. Continue on. He says, there is a revolt that takes place in the mind because of the way that man was made. Now highlight this section here. Unless Holy Spirit is with you and guides you, you can easily become offended when someone tries to correct you and says, you're sinning, you need to turn from this, run from it, get the hell out of it. Then this bolt of energy or rebellion comes into your mind and you start saying, I don't like this place any longer. Highlight all that section. It says, I want to get out of this place. I want to go someplace else. And this is what takes place in a person's mind. They're not even realizing what they're doing. That's the thing. So subtle, they don't even realize what they're doing. And many false prophets, notice. He talked about the false prophets. It may be a friend, maybe a teacher, a buddy, a co-worker, employer who will bring this stuff to you. But you have to be on guard from all directions. Trust no one, Yahweh says. Trust no one. Be on guard and trust the scriptures and Yahweh only. Now, many prophets will arise, or many preachers, many religious counterfeits will arise and try to teach you, when their job is not even to teach you. Notice, they're trespassing when they try to teach you. You belong to Yahweh. Remember 1 Yahweh 5:19. We belong to Yahweh, the world belongs to the gods. You belong to Yahweh. You have a teacher set over you in prophecy, and he is the only one who has a right. All the rest are imposters. So when they try to do this, they're trespassing when they do it. They're cut off from Yahweh to begin with, even wanting to take the place of the one who is authorized, of the one who is sent. They become trespassers. And that's what Jeremiah 23 talks about. You know, that they say that they're sent, they're not sent. They teach to go against Yahweh's laws, to teach Christianity, and if you don't keep Yahweh's ways and his laws, then you're believing in Christianity. You're living a lie. So only the one sent has that authority to teach. We belong to Yahweh and we belong to Him. And He is our teacher, and we will live by what He teaches us. Otherwise, we will be doomed. But if we continue to teach what we have been taught and believe what we've been taught, then we can endure to the end in these last 3.5 years, and Yahweh will promise us. He's already promised us, but He's waiting to reveal us to the entire universe. And that's what they're waiting for, is to see who will make it. Yahweh bless you. We'll stop here on page 74, and that was verse 22, and we'll start off there back again next week.